Owen,
Here.
Commissioner Jay,
Here.
Commissioner Middlestat,
Here, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute.
and Commissioner Paraskevas,
Here.
Commissioner Swarzler.
Here.
All right. Everyone have a chance to review the minutes from the November 2nd, 2020 meeting? If they're all in order or if there's any changes need to be made.
I saw my last name auto-corrected on the adjourn thing again, sorry. It's a tough name, it does it all the time.
Oh.
Well, what I'm going to do is correct the autocorrect.
There we go. All right. Any other corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of November 2nd.
So moved.
Second. This is Sally.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. I don't think we have any regular visitor comments or public comments or staff reports or unfinished business. So I think we can move right into the new business. And Fred, I guess you get to read the first part of the script.
Sure, sounds good. So we are doing the floodplain standards first, right? So I think you want to call that hearing to order. Is that correct? No hearing called to order. Just go for it.
Well, the script I have shows you reading a bunch of words.
And then it says chair opens hearing. All right, I see it. Okay, then. All right. Hi, everybody. This evening, the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on Legislative Amendment LA 2020-05 to consider amendment of the Independence Development Code. These revisions would revise the flood damage prevention ordinance found in subchapter 51. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. These proceedings will be recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. At the beginning of the public hearing tonight, staff will identify the applicable substantive criteria from the city's comprehensive plan and/or state of Oregon statewide planning goals. For anyone wishing to speak, we are asking you to use the speaker cards that are provided. When called upon to speak, you must be recognized by the chair and you must state your name and address for the public record. Before we begin, does any commissioner wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest in this matter?
No.
Seeing none, go
Yes.
for it, Corby.
All right, I will go ahead and open the public hearing LA-2020-05. And with that, I bet you would love to give us a staff report, Fred.
Love it. Yes. So these changes are basically changes. You folks will remember we talked about this a couple of months ago. Basically, the deal is once every, let's say, 5 to 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there, the state comes out and they look at our floodplain regulations. They did that just recently, and they came up with a whole list of things that we needed to change as part of our floodplain regulations. Ultimately, when you look at it, it's not all that significant, the amount of stuff that they wanted us to change, but it filled up something like a 32-page memo, right? It was one of those things where they just sort of go down a checklist. They look for all of these things in our code and they say, well, you don't have this section. You need to have an additional bit of language here. We looked at all of that. That is on our website. If you want to look at it, you could Google City of Independence Planning Department code changes. Just click on that and you can see that entire list. I just went ahead and put it up there to be transparent with what we're doing here. So basically, we took that set of comments and we're like, wow, we really don't want to try and make each and every one of these comments in a way that addresses these concerns. Instead, it makes more sense to us to look at the state model code and see if we can adopt that. We looked at it, we realized, wow, this is very similar to our existing code as it's written. And so let's go ahead and adopt that state model code into our code instead. Now, my theory after looking at it a bunch of times is our previous code was a state model code, and then the state changed their model code, and now they're saying, hey, you're inconsistent with our expectations. And so we would just sort of adopt the latest version of the model code is the thing. Now, there are some differences between the standards. One of them is that we would now require an elevation certificate at the time of development application. Currently, we require elevation certificate at the time of foundation and at the time of occupancy. The state has said you need a third elevation certificate. We said, okay. So we would now require an elevation certificate at the time of application. You'll see there's also additional requirements for the retention of documents. There's new requirements about submitting boundary changes to FEMA. There's an expanded section related to variances. It ends up being fairly similar. There's sort of revised sections related to electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and other equipment. There's new standards or expanded standards for flood openings. There's new standards for garages, manufactured homes, and all of that sort of stuff. What I'll do is I'll just sort of pull up the codes and hopefully you can sort of get a sense of just when I say expanded sections for certain of these things, hopefully you'll sort of see how this works. So, Jason, can you allow me to share my screen? Oh dear. All right. So, okay. Well, apparently I can't share my screen for some reason. All right. So basically, let me just explain this to you. So currently how this works, oh, now I can. Screen 2. All right, let me show this to you. All right, so currently, this is the wrong document. There's the existing, here's the model. So you'll see how this works is these are the various sections. So let's take, for instance, I'll show you this. Is that where, yeah, let's go to garage, no, let's go to residential construction first. So you'll see this residential construction, right? And this is the model code. It just says, hey, you have to make sure that you're raised above base flood elevation at least 1 foot. And enclosed areas below that 1 foot have to have flood vents, essentially. Well, currently in our code, we have something very, very, very similar to that. Let me just show you this. I'm sorry, I should have gotten to it first. Residential construction, you have to elevate 1 foot above base flood elevation, and anything below that, you need flood vents. Now you'll see it actually spells out in the current code all of these flood venting requirements and requirements for crawl space. Now you'll note in the proposed language, it's much shorter. Now why is that? Well, because the flood vent regulations are actually above, so flood openings, and then those standards that were down below are in this section now. So is it all that different? No, not really, but it just sort of shifted where they want the flood opening requirements. Why would they do that? Well, I think that the state probably looked and they probably saw, hey, you know what? We only have our flood opening requirements in the residential section, and they could apply much more broadly to things like a garage or something like a commercial use or whatever it might be. And they're like, shoot, we should probably put that in a standalone section. So I imagine that's why they sort of moved it up and had it standalone. Same sort of thing with garages. Now, currently, in our code, we would treat a garage as, as residential construction, right? Well, somebody, no doubt, granted a permit for a garage without making them meet the residential standards. And so the state probably looked at their code and they're like, shoot, we better clarify that garages are actually subject to the requirements too. And so you'll see there's now a specified section for garages. This is essentially what I think happened for a lot of these things. This is why a lot of this stuff is just in greater detail, like electrical, mechanical, and plumbing and other equipment. This is a new heading, but you'll see we have very similar standards currently in our code, right? Electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, and air conditioning equipment have to be designed so water doesn't accumulate within the components during flooding. Well, that's what that essentially says right here, right? It just specifies more electrical and whatnot systems. So basically, this is the essence of how these changes work. They're, for the most part, they're very, very, very similar to what we currently have. The same basic requirements are going to apply still. You have to elevate your structure to 1 foot above base flood elevation. Anything below that base flood elevation, you have to either flood proof or you have to have, flood openings. So same sort of requirements apply. Now there is one change that we're proposing associated with this. The change is basically to remove notice requirements associated with flood permits. Now, we received a comment today basically encouraging us to not remove those public notice requirements. And we completely understand why. I mean, we always think public notice is a good thing. Now, we recommended removing those basically because if you flood vent, if you raise your structure to a foot above base flood elevation, we have to approve an application. And so basically at that point, my question is, what good is the public input? Basically, we solicit the input to then essentially say, sorry, we need to grant the permit anyways. I personally think that's asking for public input when public input can't actually do anything. And I think that's not a very good basis of public policy. I looked into it too. Part of the reason that I thought that this made sense was because I've never seen a public notice associated with a flood permit. I've worked in a few jurisdictions and I had never, ever sent out public notice for a flood permit before. I was in Lewis County and a lot of Lewis County up in Washington is floodplain. And I just had never, ever seen it before. And so I thought that's strange. And so I looked around here and I just sort of double checked. I looked at Monmouth. Monmouth actually does provide notice for floodplain applications. They're the only community that I found though. I looked at Salem. Salem does not provide flood notice for flood applications. I looked at Corvallis. Corvallis does not provide flood notice for applications. I looked at Silverton. Silverton does not provide flood notice for applications. And I looked at City of Dallas. City of Dallas does not provide notice for flood applications. What they do is what is similar to what would happen under our proposed revision for floodplain variances. We would continue to provide public notice for those sort of applications. That's very consistent to what all of those communities is doing. Also, if somebody is proposing a subdivision or something like that, that flood permit gets wrapped up into that floodplain application, or if it's a site design review and it's sort of a higher level review, that flood permit gets wrapped up in that review as well. So certain permits will have public notice associated with them, just the larger sort of permits. But for the vast majority of like single family homes and all of that stuff, we would not require the public notice associated with that. Now, part of the issue and part of the reason why we're thinking about that in the first place is, say somebody proposes a fence. Somebody proposes a fence in the floodplain. Does a fence require public notice? Now, if somebody's trying to do a fence in a floodplain, we talked about it. We thought, wow, a fence in a floodplain, doesn't have that degree of impact. Now, if we put public, anyways, it just adds a level of review time essentially to a permit, and it doesn't actually give a whole lot of actual productive input that we can then use to either condition approval or what anything like that. Now, basically, that's the extent of the changes that we're proposing. Are there any questions about that? We did send this to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. We definitely did that. Provided notice of this. Also, part of the notice that we did was we did provide a Measure 56 notice for this. So that meant we sent this out to something like 147 floodplain properties, just direct mail to allow people to comment on this. We did receive 2 formal comments. I did also get a number of calls just asking about what the code changes would mean to folks. So I did talk to some people about it. There might be some people in the lobby as well. So any questions about that so far?
I have a couple questions on your notification. You're not asking for comment, you're notifying, you're being a good neighbor, you have open communication, you have transparency. You just went through for the city a close election race, and part of the issue was what's going on in the city. And if we don't try to make sure that everybody knows who's near some development, what's going on, you get labeled again with not being transparent and not being a good neighbor. I don't think it hurts to let adjacent properties know if there's some development going on a floodplain. I think that's only what a good city should do, what good communication should do, what transparency should do. Don't think it's implying you're asking for them to, when you give that notification, you're not asking them for comment, you're just letting them know that this is going on.
I think that I think that is fine. I think that would be a fine purpose for providing notice, but that's not how we do public notice. We seek comments, and we seek comments.
But it doesn't say in what you're proposing that you're asking for comments. It just says, notice will be sent to adjacent property owners. It doesn't say you're asking for a comment, it's just letting them know. And yes, you can put it in the itemizer, but who reads all that? Who even reads the itemizer most of the time? It's not like it's something that's accessible to the neighborhood where something's happening.
I think I agree with the sentiment entirely about noticing things. I just don't, it doesn't sound like there's sort of a 2-stage mechanism. It's sort of like if you're providing notice, you're inviting comment, like sort of almost always, as I think what Fred's saying. And I think I brought it up at the last meeting that inviting public comment, whether explicitly or not, is sort of just it's not, I'm not saying it's not helping anything, but I worry that it sets an expectation that somebody's comment can actually move something one way or another versus, so I actually think really what you're proposing is sort of providing notice as an FYI versus inviting, and I think that I don't know if there's a mechanism in the city to do something like that, but I don't think I think I agree with you in that respect of just like, getting a letter saying this is happening versus getting a letter and saying this is happening, what do you think about it? And then when you show up to comment on something, it doesn't really matter what you think because it met the letter of the law. And so there's nothing to be done anyway. So I do agree with you. I just think there's maybe not a mechanism.
Perhaps you change the rest of that portion to say, instead of saying you have 14 days to respond with written comments, you say this is a notice for your information only, instead of saying that they have 14 days to respond with written comments. Because that's, the other part of the number 6 says, adjacent property owners will have 14 days to respond with written comments prior to the issuance of a decision. Perhaps you change that part instead of the notification part. It's on page 52 of 95.
I guess, adding to that, then my concern is, where do we stop? So if a neighbor is building a fence, if a neighbor is building a deck or doing a remodel or pouring a driveway, anytime some sort of permit is pulled, are we then obligated to provide some sort of notification? And so I kind of, like Alex was saying, I get the sentiment of kind of alerting people to developments or things that are happening, but excuse me, is there maybe a better mechanism of doing that? And yes, advertising in the IO is a kind of a legal check mark saying we've done that, we've advertised. I don't know if the city would be amenable to maybe just having a list on the website, but again, that has to be updated, and kept updated by somebody. So, but I worry that we would be setting a precedent that would expand really quickly.
I'm not saying you have to do it for all of those things. I'm just saying there's already a space where it says you're going to send notifications on other things. And if you're going to do something in the floodplain, I think it's only neighborly and it's only transparency to make sure that everybody adjacent to that property knows that something's happening.
But I think by that point, at the point that it's hit this part in the approval process, it's already going forward, right? So there would be something else that would trip it up.
But it's not going forward if it's first coming to the Planning Commission. That's where it first comes. So really nothing's happening. And if you're asking them to have an elevation certificate when they're putting in their application, which I think is a good thing, if their land is too low, they need to know that before they go through more process. That makes sense to me, to have that elevation certification done at the beginning of the whole process. But it is important that if you're going to make a change, people adjacent to you on that floodplain should know. I don't think that's being too overly communicative. I think it's only right and just. And fences, actually, Fred, fences can cause problems because they back up all the brush and the branches and stuff, and they can cause trouble. So yeah, if somebody's putting in a fence, like it's going to be with slats or something that might hold back brush, I think that would be an important thing for neighbors to know.
Yeah, so essentially that gets back to this sort of issue. So if it meets the standards, so say somebody's putting in a fence. Say somebody comes in and says that fence is going to flood my property. If they come in and they say that to me, all I have to respond with is the fence meets the requirements.
But it still would be nice to know that if you had a property next to it. And I think that's part of the whole question about having people think their government is responsive and that they can have a relationship with their government instead of thinking they always do that to me. And I don't have any input. I don't have any access. I don't know what's going on.
See, and I feel like that gets to, I mean, because that exact situation is where I think the distrust comes in. Like, they sought my input and then I gave my input and they still did whatever they wanted. And
you can say it's not for input. You can say this is just for your information. And maybe if they have a good complaint, maybe you need to think about, is there something else we need to change if they bring forward one?
Hey,
Or you wanted to say something, and I'm curious your thoughts, just to call you out.
Oh, well, sorry, Kate. Becky, when you were first speaking, I thought you were talking more about a development, of which case Fred, I think, mentioned a development itself, floodplain or not, has a process and that can seek public comment. And that's much different than my neighbor wanting to put a fence in because it's not my business whether they do that. And so that was just what my comment was going to be. Like, well, if you're concerned about from a development perspective, there's already a process and that would still happen. But if you are really concerned about every driveway and every fence and that's a whole nother process. And I agree with Kate on where do you draw the line on that? Every time a permit's pulled, everyone next to you has to know or gets to know. I don't know. So I'm leaning towards Kate. I understand the sentiment. I don't like giving city staff, I don't like not giving city staff tools to help solve problems and putting problems on their plate. And that's where I think this puts us. And so that's a sticky point. That's how I feel.
Has this come up as an issue before when you have given notice? Because before you had to have given notice. Has anybody sought to change something?
Yes, yes, they have. And it's one of those things where to be honest, it puts me in sort of an awkward position because, here these folks, the comments that I've gotten are super good. I really appreciate that they write the comments, that they spent time on it. And then basically I have the application and there's really nothing I can do with the comments. It's just sort of like, what do I do with comments that I don't then have a condition to actually tie a comment to, right?
Is it a comment that would make a difference if you could address it?
Well, the only way that we could address it is if we had more sophisticated standards than the state has, right? If, the requirements are essentially, basically it boils down to flood openings and raising the structure, right? If you raise your structure above base flood elevation, basically it's allowed under the floodplain regulations, right? Even if somebody came back and said, that's going to flood my property, right? We would say.
But why do you get to do that? If you're going to flood someone else's property, wouldn't you be liable for that damage?
Potentially. The requirements are what we have. That's what we currently have right now. So even if somebody came back and said, that's going to flood my property or that's going to do whatever, so long as, in a floodway, we require a zero rise analysis, right? Well, the vast majority of floodplains are not floodways. Floodplains are sort of the non-moving part of the river, right? So there's current in the floodway. The floodplains are sort of where the rest of the water sort of spills out to, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to develop in a floodway, if you're trying to do something, we don't allow houses in the floodway.
Right.
But if you're trying to do something in the floodway, we require what's called a zero rise analysis to essentially show that you're not going to cause that floodway to either rise or move, right? But we don't require that in floodplains. That's not a requirement for any of the floodplains. Basically, the requirement in floodplains is raise your structure a foot above base flood elevation, include flood openings, and that sort of stuff. If you meet that, it's an approved application.
I guess I understand where Becky's coming from on this. That's for sure. Do you know why Monmouth has that requirement? Whereas the other cities don't, Fred?
I don't want to make a generalization. I want to say that basically I think our code and their code are very similar. And so I think that they were probably written by the same author, and the same author probably included notice for both of ours. And I want to say that you see that we have accepted certain things out of it, and in that sixth section that Becky was talking about, we don't require notice for home occupations, sign permits, and lot line adjustments. I think that we've gradually started taking stuff away from the public notice requirements, just because we realize that there's certain things that are either public comment doesn't do a whole lot to influence a decision, or we just don't need public comment on. I mean, another one, there's certain things that would no doubt be good to have public notice on. But I mean, I like the idea of the public notice, but then I would say that would require, we would want to give some thought about what would actually require public notice versus not. And basically, when we were talking about this originally with this whole because originally my idea was, hey, let's exempt out certain permits from the requirement to provide notice. And we essentially we thought about it for a little bit, and we're like, what do you exempt out versus what do you keep? Right? It's the same sort of thing. Is it pouring a driveway slab, or is it, what exactly do you exempt out? And then we came to the conclusion, you know what, it might just be easier just to remove the notice requirement altogether, but keep it for things like flood variances and stuff like that, where, and a flood variance would come to you guys. So all the rest of the permits are processed in-house. It's a staff level decision. So.
Any more comments for Fred before we move along? Okay. Are there any folks out in the waiting room? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and close the hearing if there are no objections. So leave it up to the voice of all of us discussing this, if we need to discuss it anymore. Any other discussion, questions, motion?
I will note that we got 2 public comments, and they should have been sent to you today. So just, I guess I guess just wanted to note that.
Okay. The only one I have is that text back and forth or email back and forth with Jack Waddell.
That's one of them. Karen also sent out one from Kristen Larson, who was asking for the retention of the public notice requirement. So you should have received that as well.
Okay, I did not see that. Everybody else have a chance to see it?
It came late this afternoon.
It might have been, like I said earlier, I'm on a different email situation here than what I normally use, so.
And Kristen is with the Luckemute Watershed Council.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, she did not identify herself as an employee of such, though. She did just identified herself as a private party.
Public person. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's not any more discussion, anyone like to take a stab at a motion?
I did have a question actually just related to her email. So she says that there's not, it's like there's not a type, it's not the same rationale applied to other type 1. Is that, I assume that's correct. And like what she's saying. I think it just speaks to like a bigger, and it speaks to Becky's point too, of like what's noticed, what's not noticed, what should be, sort of what should be noticed, what shouldn't be noticed. I mean, I think in a perfect world, it would be amazing to have some sort of, I don't know, web news feed of permitting or something like that. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of work for somebody to do, and especially for a planner. And I would never want to saddle city staff with that necessarily, because I think it's sort of, I wouldn't say it's Pandora's box, but I think that is a lot more work than like maintaining a web page. So I'm just curious what knowing sort of what Becky is talking about are those thoughts around transparency, regards to the city. I am slightly curious about what your take would be sort of moving forward to maybe combat some of that sentiment with a public notice and with the process. I know it's like sort of a bigger philosophical question, but I think before we approve or not, this amendment would be just an interesting thing to bat around for a couple minutes.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Basically, I mean, who goes to the city website ever? Anybody?
I mean, yeah, but yeah, I mean, sort of professionally, not necessarily personally.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, let me see if I can share my screen one more time. Oops, hold on. Because basically, I think personally, I'm trying to be transparent. So let me see if this works. All right, so basically, so how my philosophy on transparency is you try and ask folks for input on the most important things that are going on in the community, right?
Right, we're seeing your email screen for the record.
Oh, my email screen.
Yeah.
Did I screen it? I did the wrong screen, eh? Sorry, Jason. Thank you very much. Let me try and reshare this. It was funny that, well, I won't, how do I stop? All right. Screen 1 or screen 2 is the screen on my right. Screen 1 is this screen on my left. Sorry about that.
There you go.
So here is our webpage, right? This is what this is the planning webpage. My philosophy is you try and get input about what is the most important things that are going on in the community, right? And so, so basically, but we don't. I have not included any sort of projects on here. Now, we could absolutely include projects. The amount of detail, though, that we show in these projects, though, on this page, we might want to think about that. Like, it might just be like a simple, hey, this is going on. If you want agenda packet or something like that go to the meeting agenda, because I don't want to have two different sets of documents going around. So I mean, like planning projects and code changes, right? Here's your 2 public hearings tonight. They're on the page. We're trying to be transparent with what's going on, right? It even notes the right date when there's going to be a public hearing on these things, right? Our update to the flood requirements, like I said, we actually included, just because I wanted to be transparent about that, like actually everything that was included in the flood audit, right? 38 pages. I think I said it was 32. So this was what the state went through and looked at our code, right? We're trying to be transparent with these things. Now, part of the thing that I think is kind of difficult for most cities is, and it's difficult for us, so I'll take any sort of input that you guys got on it, is curating the information that you want people to respond to. How do you sort of sift what people are interested in? Basically, my sort of filter is what has the most potential impact on people, right? And so that's why things like the transportation system plan get their own button, right? That's like a big project. That's why that too is even on our first page right here, right? So you can get to something like that. So I mean, we are trying to consider what are people interested in. Now, I think it would absolutely make sense to include a button just right here, like with planning projects that require a permit. Now that's going to be a fairly short list. It shouldn't be that difficult to sort of update, but I don't think I would want to include a whole bunch of information because documents change and all that sort of stuff. I think it could get kind of messy kind of quick. So it'd probably be just something simple. So what do you think about that, Alex?
So explain that. So you'd have a button, or what you're sort of saying is a button with
just a list of planning projects or something.
So that have permit, that had to go through a permit process.
Yeah, we could totally do something like that if that's something that people wanted.
Identify what kind of permits being asked for.
Yeah, we could totally do that.
I mean, if you just put the address, it probably won't mean much to people, but you might want to say, what are you doing and how, what permits are needed.
Yeah, we could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we're trying to be conscious of workload and managing such a process, but sort of on its face, I don't hate the idea of being able to see a list. But at the same time, I also realize I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's applying for a permit, and like, do I need everybody to know? And do I need input? And I mean, you're not soliciting input, you're just putting a notice, but by putting a notice, I think you are de facto soliciting input, or, sort of implicitly soliciting input. And I do want to, I think I need to think about that a tiny bit more before I it just seems like sort of another potential headache, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that a little bit. I like the idea of it. And I think the people that want to seek the information out, there's ways to find that. So directing people to the website, I don't think is a problem. And maybe it's for certain classes, like certainly commercial buildings or something that they already have a public input process. But yeah, if I'm a homeowner and I'm putting up a fence or a storage shed out in the back, and so I'm going through a very standard permit process, and I have a neighbor that I have issues with or something, and the neighbor sees that and is like, I'm going to raise issues with that. As a homeowner, I'm doing everything correctly. I'm going through the city permit process. It's an approved, there's nothing controversial about it. I don't want to all of a sudden be getting sort of harassed by my neighbors or other people thinking that this is something that they have the ability to comment on. That would be my big concern.
Again, it's sort of the whole sort of notion of the whole tiers thing. We're just trying to curate the information because ultimately the vast majority of people aren't going to be interested in you putting up a shed, right? But they're going to be interested in like an industrial building off a striker or whatever it might be. Yeah. So one thing I'd be happy to do is just even have a page for major projects and just sort of list it as major projects like subdivision, you know, coming through, site design review, going through the process, something like that I could definitely do something like that.
Yeah, I think that's where my brain is heading. Sort of something like that, where it's like the bigger commercial industrial or development, like sort of, well, you know, subdivisions and whatnot. I think that makes sense to me quite a bit. And I think generally those are probably the ones that people, I wouldn't say raise their eyebrows, but it's the stuff you notice when you're driving around. And you're like, I wonder what's happening. So
yeah, and we have, and I mean, it's been Tom's idea, but every month pretty much we put out something in the utility bill, the River City Briefs, where we actually note some of the bigger projects going on in town, and just where they're at or what's going on with those projects. So we have been trying to be transparent in that way as well.
Is that online anywhere?
No, it's not.
That'd probably be.
Is it?
Or Becky's nodding her head that it is online. Oh, it's not. Okay. So yeah. So
I'm saying it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's like the low hanging fruit. If you're already producing it in one place, just copy paste it to another place, and like that's a good start. And then maybe we build off of that, or maybe we don't. But I think that to me is like that's the start right there. Done.
Cool.
The River City Briefs are online. It's just the most current one is not on there yet.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. But even just cribbing that information around the development projects and just putting a button on the planning, you know, and again, I would want, you know, so I have a tiny bit of exposure to web marketing content and whatever. Like I'd want to look at the traffic at some point of like, if this is 4 people and this is taking a lot of effort to maintain, then like, okay. But at the same time as a city, like it kind of doesn't matter what the traffic is. The information should also be up there for any, you know, for those 4 people that want to see it. So.
Right. Sounds good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go down this rabbit hole, but I do think it's I don't know. It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll speak for Karen and I, we want to be good public servants, right? You know?
Okay. Still no more discussion. Should we go ahead and do a motion?
I guess before we get to that, I want to know, are you going to do those things, or is that just discussion for now? Will you put up a link on the projects from the River City News on the planning page? Will you put up a list of projects going forward that people could look up on that page? It's just, you know,
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's fine.
Because
that's public information. And you know what? I would, yeah, no, I think it's good.
Okay. Any more discussion? Who's the brave one?
I have a suggested motion. If somebody wants to say okay. I move to recommend approval to the City Council Legislative Amendment 2020-05 based on the findings and recommendations contained in the staff report.
Yeah, I'll take a stab. I move that we move to City Council the approval of Legislative Amendment 2020-05 based on the staff report. I don't know, I missed, I'm sure, half a sentence there.
Based on the findings, yeah.
Based on the findings
And recommendations.
And recommendations and staff report. Thanks, sorry.
If they
okay.
tag on with the direction that planning issues be put on the planning website.
It feels like we should separate that piece out,
Okay. Okay.
at least to my opinion. Yeah.
Mhm. Agreed.
I second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. Okay, well, let's move on to the second public hearing. So Fred, I guess you'll have to read the whole kit and caboodle again.
That's fine, I'm ready.
All right.
All right. Uh-oh. Hit a button. All right. This evening, the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on Legislative Amendment LA 2020-04 to consider amendment of the Independence Development Code. These revisions would reorganize industrial zones, the industrial zone codes. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. These proceedings will be recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. At the beginning of the public hearing tonight, staff will identify the applicable substantive criteria from the city's comprehensive plan and/or state of Oregon statewide planning goals. For anyone wishing to speak, we are asking that you use the speaker cards that are provided. When called upon to speak, you must be recognized by the chair and you must state your name and address for the public record. Before we begin, does any commissioner wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest in this matter?
Yep.
Cool. So this is a
I'll open. Okay, I will now open public hearing for legislative amendment 2020-04. So staff report, please, Fred.
You betcha. This zoning change is just another one of these very simple sort of zoning changes, basically reorganizing the code, trying to put things in the same place, use matrices and all this sort of stuff. Basically, it would not change the standards in the zones at all. The idea is that you would take all the allowed uses within the industrial, the light industrial, heavy industrial, and the industrial park zones, and it would put them in one matrix. So you could look across and you could see the differences between the zones, rather than trying to figure out what in the world is the difference between this zone and that zone. You sort of got to wade through the text to actually figure it out. And so basically it would provide us a nice matrix. We can look at it. It's much simpler. We can see what the minimum lot sizes are, the density and the dimensional requirements, and then we're able to strip a whole bunch of text from the codes. That's essentially what we're doing here. You've done something very similar with the residential and commercial zones. It's the same sort of principle, right? You put the performance standards in one place, you put the marijuana standards in another place, you put some of the stuff in matrices, and then everything else for the zones is simple. So that's basically the idea. It's just sort of continuing that same concept for the last major set of zones that we have in the community, the industrial zones. This did get sent to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. It was quite a while ago. At this point, we didn't receive any sort of comments back on this. We issued notice of this in the paper. We have it on our website, all of this sort of stuff. We have heard nothing in response to these changes. So yeah, I guess that's basically it. Are there any questions?
I mean, this in a lot of ways speaks a little bit to transparency of code, where it's like, as long as it's, simple, more accessible, easier to digest, fewer barriers to entry. So I think we're all, I mean, I'm not going to speak for the whole commission, but I like this kind of stuff. I really appreciate that. And I know it's takes a lot of effort to probably wrap your brain around and make it all work and make sure you don't miss anything. So yeah, I love it.
Any other questions? And I take it nobody's come to the office front there to speak? Okay. I'll go ahead. If there are no objections, I will close the public hearing. So any more discussion need to be done, or can we do a motion?
I can try.
Okay.
I mean, I move to approve LA 2020-04 to simplify the code with the matrix system as suggested by city staff. Is that right?
I will take that to mean that you're moving to recommend approval to the city council.
Yes, thank you, Karen.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Sally.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay. So we'll flip over the page and move on to other discussion and information items. 8.1, the Independence Downtown Association Asset Mapping Exercise.
Would you like to talk about this, Kate?
Yes, I would love to. So this is just, it's a little bit more of an information only item at this point, but I did want to bring it to people's attention, just get it on your radar screen. I'm also the president of the Downtown Association. And so IDA is part of the Oregon Main Street Network, and that's part of a larger national organization that uses a Main Street approach as a framework for making sure that our main streets are maintained and enhanced in terms of the downtown vitality for it. Locally in Oregon, it is run by the Oregon State Parks. And so that's where our connection is through Sherry Stewart, who's great. She's been there for a long time. She's been a huge amount of help for us in terms of understanding how we can bring vitality to our main street. And that's anything from the historic buildings to marketing, promotions, and that sort of thing. So one of the things that they recommend for us to do, and also let me back up real quick, there's 3 different tiers to this program. So Independence is in the lowest tier, the kind of the exploring Main Street. And that's consistent for the size of community that we are. We're all volunteers, so we don't have dedicated staff members. We do have an MOU with the city, with Brittany Williams specifically. She's the downtown manager. She just helps coordinate and provide some good coordination between us and the city, especially in terms of like events and how do we manage that and schedule things. So one of the things that they meaning the Main Street organization would like to see us do is what's called an asset mapping exercise. We don't have a specific date for it. It's just a goal that we have on the calendar for this coming year. So whether we accomplish that in the first half or the last half, it's going to depend. And we may include Sherry Stewart to come out and do some sort of workshop or helping us kick that off. But basically what it is, it's an exercise where we go through the identified kind of footprint that we have for our Main Street area. And it's tied a lot to, say, economic development and how do we kind of understand what's there in our Main Street and what opportunities and constraints we might have. A lot of it is helping to identify the different types of spaces that we have. And this is helpful in the sense of when somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm interested in opening a retail shop in Independence. Where are some potential locations that I might be able to access? Are there spaces that are underutilized? And these are often like maybe second floor. So like the Little Mall on Main actually has a fair amount of office space on that second floor that I think people often kind of overlook. And so it's just really understanding what's there on our Main Street. And this is where it kind of starts to overlap with the planning though, is because part of this is you start looking for trends and opportunities that your downtown might have. And that could be things like, hey, we've noticed that there are 3 or 4 antique stores. We could cluster those together and start doing things where we can cross promote them. Or maybe it's a food cluster, or maybe there's 3 or 4 art galleries that you can then say, hey, by working together, we might be able to get this on the map, or we might be able to do something together with that. It's also a great tool for, is there an opportunity or a need that we want to try to attract something to our downtown that could be really beneficial? So if you think about something like, boy, we've noticed that there are 8 different professional service providers. Might be a good idea for somebody, or there could be an opportunity for somebody to come in and have like a copy or a print shop or something along those lines. So it's just an exercise of looking at what's here, what's existing, what are some opportunities, what are some constraints, and then with that, you can start figuring out, again, do we want to try to attract certain businesses to the area? Are there ways that we can market things? And I think Monmouth actually has a really good example of that right now. They took a look around and they said, well, we have a florist, we have a photographer, we have people that do catering. What are the types of people that need that kind of service, as well as the B&B, Mamir's Guest House that's right there. And they said, let's work together to market this as a wedding destination. And so they're starting to work together of trying to attract and promote business coming into the downtown, their downtown, that focuses on that. With that said, this can also be looking at, well, are there types of uses that we don't want? So with this, kind of the final piece of it is you do this asset mapping exercise, and then you say, does our code support being able to do this? And so that's where the Planning Commission comes in. So let's say, for example, in Independence, we wanted to get like a recreation cluster going. Does our code allow boat rentals, bike rentals? I'm guessing that it does, but it's a good way to kind of tie all those pieces in together. And on the flip side, you see this often used for uses that you don't want. So examples of that are often like adult entertainment, the marijuana, maybe firearm sales, that sort of thing, where people are saying, in addition to, we would love to see this in our downtown, here are some things that we don't want to see. And do we have the code or mechanisms in place to preclude some of that activity happening? And I think a good example of that is with like dispensaries. It can't be within X number of feet of a school. And so for us, we have IES right at the edge of our downtown. And so that is what's preventing essentially the dispensaries from coming into our downtown core. Whereas you see in Monmouth, for example, that's not the case because they don't have that sort of mechanism in place. So it's just a kind of an FYI. I'd be happy to keep people informed of this. You would certainly be invited to come participate in this exercise. Again, I'm going to try to get Sherry Stewart from the state to come out and help us at least kick this off or kind of facilitate the outline of it. But I think it is a really interesting, kind of fun and proactive exercise to go through to really understand how the look and feel of our downtown can be impacted by what's in our code. And I'm happy to answer questions or take comments, anything like that.
Unmute. Any other questions for Kate? All right, well, thank you, Kate. Very informative. But yeah, definitely keep us up to date on that. Okay, we'll move along to 8.2, update on other ongoing projects. So I bet Fred has something to say about that.
Perfect. Well, we got a couple of projects going on. I've told you guys about the trolley project, right?
Yep.
So we're really trying to get to a point where we have a trolley report that we can then start talking about with various folks. It's really a trolley feasibility report. Now, also, we've been sort of cranking on the transportation system plan. And have you guys been thinking about transportation at all? Or what do you folks, do you guys want to talk about transportation at all? Or I might What do you guys think? I might just throw one question at you. Ready? You
I say
wanna-
go for it.
I'll just throw one question at you. Let's see if I can share my proper screen this time. What number did I say?
2 is the right one.
Screen number 2. Very good, Alex.
Yeah, I
You
remember.
win.
Gold star.
Gold star. So, okay, let's talk about, we've sort of talked about Main and Monmouth, right? And that intersection. Now let's just sort of talk about Monmouth in general. Monmouth Street. This street is a very important street in our community, it seems to me. It's a highway, right? It's a place where we've got nice stately buildings like that church right there. Also the old library, right? You look and you see at this section right here, it's a 2-lane cross section, right? You go down a little further, and I'm sorry, rather than clicking all the way down, going down a little further, you got a 3-lane cross section, right? Where you got the center turn lane. I'll just show you what that looks like. So center turn lane, and then 2 lanes on each side of the center turn lane. Now, I guess my question for you guys is, what do you sort of envision for Monmouth Street in the future? Part of the reason that I ask is because as we develop in the south area, down here, rule of maps is you always have north facing up, right? That's, so we got all this land down here that is going to develop with a number of homes. A lot of these people are going to come out here at 16th or here at 13th, or potentially somewhere between 13th and 7th, potentially other places, right? Potentially 4th, potentially G, potentially Mountain Fir. But really it's this Monmouth Street that I really get thinking about, because this is a key road in our community. And so you guys are the planning commission. What do you guys envision for that roadway? How do you envision it to look? Part of the reason I asked too is because one of the alternatives that came out in the analysis was continuing this center turn lane all the way down to, say, 4th. Well, I don't particularly like that idea because it kind of kills pedestrian space on the road, right? But I'll just say we don't really have the best pedestrian space when we have the when we have the 2-way left turn lane west of the bridge. So what are your thoughts about what you guys would like to see for Monmouth Street in the future?
I guess my question would be, what are the options? I mean, so I live on Monmouth and 4th, so I see a lot of the traffic, and I know that 7th has gotten really busy, but 4th has gotten increasingly busier as well. But I have no concept of what the options are. I mean, you can't really make the road wider.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. So, I mean, it seems to me that we have a few options. We're not going to be able to get many sort of, I don't know what they call it. You know, like we're not going to get much in the way of things like stoplights. If we got a stoplight, we're going to get one. I can almost guarantee you that we're not going to get multiple stoplights along this section of road. Same sort of thing with like a roundabout. If we got a roundabout, we're going to get one. We're not going to get like several throughout this section. I mean, potentially we could, but I mean, if we did something like that, the whole nature of this roadway is going to change. Like, say if we had 2 roundabouts, we could completely change the characteristics of this roadway, and we could make it essentially 2 lanes and then have people go around the roundabout. You've seen sort of similar approach if they want to make a left turn. So that could potentially drastically alter the road. But I mean, I don't know if anybody's sort of ready for that, or if that, you know, but also, I mean, like in this section of the road, I mean, it was apparently really difficult for the city to put in these sidewalks, right? It took quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of like work to get the right of way to actually put these sidewalks in and everything. And so you consider, okay, if we expanded this right away, we're doing that work again. And not only that, we're trying to like push it back. We're like, it's like a major project at that point. And so I don't really think I don't think expanding the road is feasible. So basically it comes to the sort of like, it comes back to the question, like, what do we want? Like how might we do something like that?
I think your best bet is to try and move traffic off of it that's just trying to pass through. I mean, you don't want to cut the traffic that's coming to downtown and the businesses, but you do want to cut the traffic that's passing through Independence to get to Salem or Albany or something like that, coming and going. And it goes back to what you talked about last month. Where do you put the east-west corridors?
Mm-hmm. Right. So we, the other day we had a little open house, and I'll just show you one of the images or I'll show you two of the images. So, I mean, this is sort of what you're talking about, Becky. Like, I mean, we have we have essentially two good west-east routes, right? We got Hoffman and Monmouth, right? The rest of them are all sorts of like broken, you know, even coming from the river to like G Street, it doesn't line up properly. It was so funny. I was talking to an old timer. I was, you know, trying to get public input on this street. This old timer comes up to me. He's like, "You guys are so stupid. You even missed like connecting into the river." It's like, I'm sorry, I don't, you know, but I appreciated it because, you know, the west-east connectivity is even here, right? I mean, it's even broken here. And so you consider putting in Mountain Fir. Well, shoot, you got to get to Mountain Fir from the river too. How do you make that work, right? And so all of this stuff is challenging. Well, the west-east connectivity is really easy to envision. Well, what I realized too, and sort of looking at it, is guess what? Our north-south connectivity is almost as bad, because basically we have Maine, we have 16th that actually provide good connections from Monmouth to Hoffman, right? All the rest of them, you know, these are like controlled intersections right here. At 4th, you got to sort of like find a gap in the traffic and get across, and then you can get to Ash to get to Hoffman. But basically everywhere else on the corridor, you can't get north and south, right? Gun Club doesn't line up with 13th. 10th, if we were to continue it north, we're going to hit the sewer ponds. 7th doesn't go north. It dead ends at C at Pioneer Park. So I've sort of come to the conclusion, man, you know what? Our north-south connectivity is a problem too. And so I don't know.
That seems much less of an issue, honestly, though, because I think you're not trying to get, I mean, as this is completely personal and selfish, but right, like it's not usually a problem to get north, and like it's much less frequent that I'm trying to go north-south versus, you know, trying to get to down any of the commercial businesses down Monmouth Avenue,
right?
But Monmouth itself.
But it's at the same time, I hear people saying, well, give people an alternative route to go to Salem or whatever, right? And it seems to me that like part of the reason that these intersections are the way that they are is the only two ways to really get north and south is 16th and Maine, right? I don't know. It's like both of them together, right? When you like eliminate all sorts of the different connections, you're essentially forcing traffic to key like pinch points, right?
Gun Club too, though, helps on that because there is a light at Gun Club and you can turn north there if you're coming from the west. So Gun Club does help on the north conductivity. You're right, it doesn't line up on the south, but if people are trying to get to Hoffman, it's a good avenue. to get
Right.
from-
Right. I mean, one of the ideas that we had was, boy, wouldn't it be great if you could like tie 13th into gun club, but the only way that you could do something like that is like, I mean, you'd have to go through Central Plaza, which unless they were redeveloping, doesn't make any sort of sense. So
I think we just always end up coming back to what Becky said to begin with, right? It's like it feels like everything's a band-aid for getting people through, you know, because there's not a good way to get from the bridge to 99, you know, and so you have to weasel your way through. And also too, with all the Southwest development, you know, that's going to put, without another outlet for that whole area, then you're going to continue to stress, you know, the G and 51 intersection and the 7th and Monmouth Ave. And so you have like a double whammy. So, you know, I know there's no simple solution. The simple solution is money. And of course that's the fun one, but I mean, there's not really an easy way to plan around that.
yeah, okay, so let's go back to the first question, because that's really the question that I want us to think about. What do we want this street to be? Given all of those sort of situations, how do we want this street to sort of work?
I actually like that there's a transition as you get closer into downtown, kind of signaling to people that you're coming into that downtown core. It's time to slow down, especially with that school crossing and like where Natasha mentioned that she lives, because I live kind of right off in that area also. And when school's in session, that's a very busy pedestrian area. And it concerns me that we still have cars that are barreling through there at a fairly high rate of speed. And so I do like to see that movement from that 3-lane with the middle turn lane down to a 2-lane. And I'd even like to see that neck down further, or somehow visually design wise slow people down even more the couple of blocks before you actually hit that downtown.
I'd love to see like not the speed bumps, you know, but the longer ones like they have on campus at Western, because people do come barreling through there, and it goes all the way down to 20, the speed limit. And
part of the reason that I think that happens is the road feels really wide at that point, like because you've taken away you've got space for a 3rd lane there, and you take it away, and all of a sudden you create 2 jumbo lanes, right? The idea is that it's a lane there's space for parking and a space for a lane, but the reality is not many people ever park along that street.
I'd rather see the bike lanes continue.
I was just going to say, like, it seems like with bike lanes and some striping that you could narrow that quite a bit. And it also just,
I agree.
See, that's one thing that I've been sort of telling our consultant the whole time, because they came up with the idea like, oh, we'll just continue the 3-lane cross section all the way down. I'm like, dude, no, we want this to be a nice feeling road, right? We want this because this is such a key arterial or a key road in our community, right?
I agree with other comments that like I wouldn't want to see that widened, expanded, made more of a thoroughfare, because I think that's like, I don't know, it's part of the charm, right? Like it's part of I don't know. Making that 3 lanes is not the answer that I would see.
The bike lane is interesting because I used to ride my bike to Monmouth frequently, and it's kind of this like, once you hit that area of Monmouth, you don't know what to do. And then because the traffic doesn't really slow down, you end up getting onto the sidewalk, which you don't want cyclists on the sidewalks, but it wasn't, it's not really, it doesn't feel safe. So continuing that down, I think would be great. And we have tons of cyclists that come through downtown. I mean, there's always bikes in front of the downtown businesses.
I think when you ask, what do we envision? What I'm hearing people say is that you envision it being a town street, not a thoroughfare.
Right.
And I think what you want to do is somehow channel traffic other places and slow it down. You talked last month about putting a stoplight or a roundabout at 4th and Monmouth. I think a stoplight's a good idea there. It slows people down. It allows the kids to cross safely. I think a roundabout would be more difficult just because of the space you'd need and the houses and building and businesses that are already on that corner.
Right.
But when you say, what do you envision? I envision it being an access to the businesses down on Main Street. And I'd rather it not have to be the highway access to Monmouth. I'd like it to be a connector between the two towns without having to make way for all of the commuter traffic.
Right.
Well, and this is totally anecdotal, but I probably help with an accident every other month in front of my house. Of people trying to come out of 4th, and like we're used to that crunch sound now, and just go out and help. So it's, I mean, a light there would, but I think the same goes for 7th. The traffic that comes off of 7th is way heavier.
I think if you put a light at 4th, it would help on 7th. And if you put an east-west road to the south on 7th, that would help with the traffic that's trying to get out on Monmouth. Because right now there's no other place to go. It's either, as Alec was saying, you go up to Monmouth Avenue or you go out G to 51 or whichever highway that is, I'm not sure. But if you put an east-west lane south of there, that will help alleviate a lot of the traffic at 7th and Monmouth.
Yeah, so let's I mean, your point there, let's talk about just real quick, because I mean, when I think about the number of traffic lights that we're gonna get, we're not gonna get one at 4th and we're not gonna get one at 7th. We'll get one or the other, but we won't get both. Now let me ask you, what are your thoughts? If you could put a traffic light at 4th or you could put one at 7th, where would you put it?
Everybody guess my guess.
Can we fudge it? So 4th is where the school is. Can you get those lighted crossing walks? And that would, at least during the school time, help people slow down. And then you have a light at 7th, and you technically have two things that slow traffic, although one's a stoplight at 7th. I know it's not like a perfect fix, but it does indicate traffic to stop for children.
That's a good one, Tori. Or Tony. Yeah, Tori. So like I see those in Corvallis quite a bit now, where they only activate when somebody comes up the crosswalk and pushes the button. I mean, and those are city streets. I mean, what kind of justification will we have with ODOT to tell them what we want?
Well, we want to say what sort of, it seems to me that we want to actually say loudly what sort of street we want this street to be, or else ODOT forever is just going to be like, oh, this is the road that you get, right? They're not going to change ever unless we say, hey, we want this to be a great community street.
I like Tori's idea at 4th Street having that pedestrian activated crosswalk and a 7th Street light.
Okay, so there's
Is that my Christmas present?
Yeah, thanks, Corby. You've saved Christmas.
Oh boy. But before I forget this, Fred, what's the justification for the consultants that are working with the city to extend the 3rd lane all the way to downtown?
To make it easier for traffic.
To make it easier for traffic. They're essentially looking at their transportation model, and then they're trying to put in solutions that actually address the transportation problems that they're seeing pop out in their numbers. And so they considered alternatives.
But they haven't. Or how do they feel about a light at 7th Street then?
Well, they feel like a light at 7th Street could work. Now, I'm gonna throw out a reason for 4th. but you guys, I want to hear what you guys think. Now, the reason that I think that it makes kind of some sense at 4th is the fact that 4th would better help with the downtown with this intersection, because we all know that folks jump out of this queue or whatever, wherever they jump out of it, and they pull over here. And I mean, I heard the same sort of thing from our librarians at 2nd and Monmouth, where they hear either a lot of screeches or they hear collisions here at the library. So if you did something like 4th, you could potentially pull some of that traffic over there and give them a safe way to turn out. Now, you could pull them all the way down to 7th, but then you're like pulling that traffic quite a long way. And the effectiveness of it, I just don't know if it's got the same sort of help for downtown as something like a 4th. Now, another reason that kind of makes some sense for 4th for me is, I'll just show you guys this map again. 4th actually goes all the way through to Hoffman, whereas 7th just stops on the north side here. Potentially, if you did 7th and you're pulling people through this way, then this section of C to this school is going to see some more traffic. I don't know. It's just a thought.
As a person who lives south on and has to use 7th to get to Monmouth all the time, every day, I don't, unless I go by Corby's house or something like that on F Street. I hate that intersection, but I think it's more important to put the light where kids are crossing the road. And I think having the light there and drawing some traffic through makes more sense, and turning them so that they have an east-west way on Monmouth. At this point, I'm envisioning that once you do finally get a south-east-west road, the traffic on 7th will lessen.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, Becky. So where do we stand? I think I've asked this question before. I mean, is there a time frame for the east-west connection to Monmouth, or we're still working on that bridge with too much money for a bridge kind of thing? Because my wife and I drove down there, all that new subdivision there's all sorts of lots being pushed out now. I mean, that place is gigantic out there. And yeah, I don't think they're coming up Randall Way anymore, because if they're going to go up to the grocery store, the new store, it saves them time to go up to Monmouth and turn left and go up that way, rather than come barreling down Randall Way. But I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, we don't know a time frame. The city is.
The city needs to start thinking about putting a time frame on, because you have all of that building going on, and you don't have any solid plans for putting that down through. Well, yeah, we're going to do it, but
no. I mean, we do have solid. We have bridge designs. We have bridge designs for the Chestnut crossing. So I mean, that's better than a lot of cities.
There's no time frame on it, and until that point, you're going to have all of that traffic funneling up 7th with all of those dump trucks and earth movers and everything else. And someday there's going to be a need to get an emergency vehicle through, and they're going to have to wait for one of those double dump trucks to turn the corner at G and 7th and try and get out of the way along streets that are parked on both sides, and there's no room.
Right, I understand. So I mean, the city is talking with ODOT and the rail about the crossing, right? That is a key component of all of this, because even if we put in a bridge at Chestnut right now, we're not going to be able to keep on going west, because we don't have development going to the west, at least in that portion of the west. So getting out, and we expect that developers are going to be building a lot of these roads. I mean, that's basically how it works, right? I heard a good quote from Suzanne over in Monmouth. She said, "Cities don't build roads." I thought, wow, that's pretty good. We do sometimes, but it tends to be development that puts in roads. So yes, we absolutely know that we want a connection, and we absolutely know it. We're working on it. Do we have a time frame for it? No.
I think another thing to consider, this is going back to kind of the 4th to Main Street, is as our downtown expands. And so, for example, like parallel 45 is now kind of moving up into that area. And I would imagine, not too distant in the future, some of those other uses are also going to change. Someday we may have the Stonehenge may actually get built, and that's going to start to change kind of that look and feel. And so kind of replicating that downtown kind of pedestrian feel up to that kind of 4th Street intersection, I think will be really important for integrating that.
Yeah.
And I think that would help then reduce the speed. And again, kind of going back to the point, if we had to choose one spot for a stoplight, then having that at 7th as kind of hopefully a preemptive, starting to slow people down as they're coming into Independence, and also the speeders that are heading out of downtown towards Monmouth that kind of hit the gas pedal thinking they're leaving downtown. That 7th might slow things down appropriately in both directions. And then I think if the design was done nicely for that 4th to Main, that would also calm traffic a little bit just through that.
Sounds good.
How about traffic cameras down in that area that can catch speeders? And that would be revenue for the city to build the bridge.
Or our motorcycle cop.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen him down. He works quite a bit down there. And, but yeah, when I go down there 20 miles an hour, you get people on your bumper all over the place. But yeah.
Okay, well,
that's what a growing city has, those growing pains. That's for sure.
It's true. I do think that, I don't know. I'm personally pretty positive about just some of these things in here. And I think that we're actually going to figure out how to do some of this stuff. So I think that's cool. I don't know. I'm excited about it. It's just, it's a complicated problem,
How was the attendance at the open house?
We had, I thought it was pretty fun. I pretended to be a television personality, and I interviewed our consultant and sort of, played the whole, like, I tried to ask questions that I'd heard other people ask, so I thought that was pretty cool. We had, I don't know exactly how many people were watching. It was something like 14 maybe when we were doing it, but then people have since watched it on the YouTube. And so I was really thankful that we got some of the questions that we did, and I thought it was really cool that people were thinking about some of this stuff, and they were raising issues that I thought were really good. One of the questions talked about, let's see if I can show the intersection. One of the questions was talking about the Stryker Road intersection and just the difficulty in crossing this way for a pedestrian. And I thought, and it was something where clearly the gentleman had walked it a number of times and he was thinking about it. And so I just thought, wow, that was great. And so, getting that question and then getting to pose it to our TSP consultant and kind of thinking about interesting strategies for this area right here, I thought, wow, that was cool. That was a neat section of the conversation, and people were engaged, which was neat. And I just thought that was cool. So yeah, By the end of it, though, I was pretty done. It was a long day. So, any other thoughts about transportation? Again, if you guys come up with a great idea, man, I would love to hear some great ideas. I mean, how I want this TSP to come out is basically a series of just sort of big ideas that we can sort of rally around, rather than like a whole bunch of text and a whole bunch of projects that no one quite understands. I want to get it to the point where it's like, this is a big idea and this is what we're going to try and do. And I can I'm starting to sort of see what those big ideas are, and I'm kind of getting excited about it.
The big idea that I just from hearing what you're describing, the consultant's recommending, is sort of making this like an easier thoroughfare for cars. And I think maybe what you're hearing is the pushback from this group on that notion that we are just trying to expand roads to make car travel easier through town. Yeah. And I think the big idea is, is sort of maybe cliche, but it's livability and all of those things that I think that you're hearing us kind of squawk about. So
yeah, no, I think that's great. And you know what? That's exactly why I wanted to talk about this street, because this street could so easily, I'll tell you guys a story. So I was doing some planning up in Washington, right? I did this downtown plan, and I did it super quick. I didn't really think about it all that much. I gave it to the planning commission. I'm like, here's some ideas. It wasn't really a plan. I was just like, here's some design concepts that I think that we should consider pursuing. They're like, great, let's adopt this. And it's like, what? I just completely didn't even think about it. And it was so funny because when I went back to it in the future, I looked at it and I'm like, you know what I missed? The road that goes right down the middle of the downtown. There was no provisions to address that road and what that road does for this beautiful little downtown at all. And so here I'm like, no, we're not going to do something similar, right? It's so easy to sort of say, oh, that's ODOT's road, or that's ODOT's problem. But it's like, no, that's our main thoroughfare in town, right? It's so hugely important that we don't want it just to sort of go into the future and whatever happens to it happens. It's like, no, that's not how we want this. So I think, yeah, really crafting a vision for, we want this to be a great pedestrian space. We want this to not just be a road from here to Monmouth and Independence, because we got too many important things on it,
Fred, I appreciate your passion about this. I really do.
Here you go. That's right.
Okay, any more questions or comments or anything else we need to discuss before we end it for tonight?
I think the communication piece from earlier, I just want to make sure that we at least take the first steps around putting some sort of web page up for projects or just copying across the thing. But I just want to make sure that gets reflected.
Okay. And Fred promises he'll take care of that or work on it. Okay.
Easy.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else to discuss tonight, how about a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody.
That's right.
Thank you, Corby.
All right.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a fun one.